Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Gillette Pozos.
Woo!
How many times are we going to do that on the podcast?
I know.
And
I
get
think
excited
in the
about
last
ourselves, and
last-
everybody else is just going to be like, all right, we're over this. Move on, please.
In the last episode, I didn't even introduce myself. I was just so excited and trying to hit all the applause buttons. Yeah, exactly.
Well, go ahead and introduce. Oh my gosh. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's up, guys? Omar Pozos here, as always.
Yep. My mighty co-host and husband.
Woo!
Well, so today, guys, we are going to be talking about why you keep eating past fullness and what to do about it. And I know this is a topic that really comes up a lot this time of year as well when it comes to the holiday season. I know a lot of people feel like they find themselves overeating more often and more consistently. And that's really what I want to address on this podcast. Because the reality is that eating past fullness from time to time is normal. It's part of the human experience. I do it too. You do it for sure. You know, it definitely is. It's one of those things that can just happen for a myriad of reasons. That might be that you're just distracted and then you ended up overeating by accident, and that just happened, here and there. It's not a consistent thing. Or maybe just things didn't go as planned for you that day, and then you ended up overeating because you just didn't get to eat as much. And then, sometimes that happens. There can be a lot of reasons. You go out to eat at a restaurant. We know sometimes that ends up producing overeating. There can be a lot of reasons that produce just eating past the point of fullness for reasons that are not worrisome. When it becomes a problem is when you find yourself consistently eating past the point of fullness on almost a daily basis. That's when it's not good, and that's when we want to address it, because if I'm talking to you, if this is you, you know what this does to you. It leaves you in that state of feeling just uncomfortable in your body, physically not feeling good. It probably negatively affects your digestion. It can definitely impact our mood and our appetite later on. And, when your mood is off and when your appetite is off, that tends to put you into a spiral of now overeating and undereating even more, and just really ends up putting you into a spiral where you don't like how you feel in your body. You probably don't like the way your body looks. You're probably not getting any closer to your goals, and you just feel really, really stuck and out of control with the food.
Yeah. And honestly, I think, Vanessa, before we started recording, as I was reading kind of the topics and stuff that we were talking about, I was like, I'm actually very excited, because sometimes you're right, especially this time of year, as the holidays are here and, everything revolves around eating and drinking and just spending time with loved ones. I looked at it and I was like, oh, you know what? I was like, I do that as well. So I'm very excited to just, if anything, hopefully come at it myself from a curiosity standpoint and ask you a lot of more questions around what we're going to talk today, because I think, like you said, it's normal for this stuff to happen. It's normal for it to occur every once in a while. When we're seeing it almost consistently, that's when things are okay, we need to kind of dig deep a little bit and see what all is causing for this to happen, right?
Exactly. And I know we've done episodes previously on binge eating, and I'm really not even talking about binge eating within this podcast, although what I'm talking about here does typically, for the most part, apply to that as well. But for this, I'm really truly just addressing people that are I just feel like I can't just eat until I'm satisfied. I always just eat past the point of fullness, and I always end up feeling stuffed instead of satisfied. And this is really, this episode is for you. This is what we're talking about today. And I want to first very clearly address that if you find yourself consistently overeating, consistently eating past that point of fullness, past that point of satiety, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's not because you just have this lack of willpower. It's not because of just you inherently as a person, or that you have just too many cravings that are uncontrollable. It really has nothing to do with those things. It really, in my experience of just coaching close to 1,000 women at this point, I really find that it boils down to about 8 things that are typically leading people to get into this cycle of consistently overeating. So number 1 on this list of things that typically cause people to eat past fullness is having a scarcity mindset with food rather than an abundance mindset with food. Now, this is you. If you find yourself eating these indulgent foods, maybe it's you're going out for pizza and you have, a couple bites of pizza and you're immediately already thinking I'm going to eat this entire pizza. I need to eat as much of this as I can right now. I'm going to definitely just like you already in your head are knowing you're going to eat past the point of fullness. And it's typically in this mindset of like consciously thinking like, oh, this is not a food I typically have. And, probably starting tomorrow or starting Monday, I'm going to go back to my, quote unquote, normal diet, and I'm going to restrict these foods again. And so now in my head, I'm thinking I need to eat as much of this as I possibly can right now, really get all of this in and enjoy it while I can, because whether it's consciously or subconsciously, you are thinking, I am going to restrict this food in the future, so I need to eat it now. That is scarcity mindset. That is you thinking that there is not enough of this food, whether it's you consciously restricting it or other reasons that are causing you to feel like there's not enough of it.
And this is such a great point, especially this week, as we're in the States going to celebrate Thanksgiving. Well, I guess after this comes out, we would have already celebrated it. But my point being is that, it's not necessarily, and one thing I always like to go back to is we're all adult human beings, meaning if we want a pizza, if we want a donut, if we want a treat food, probably for the most part within 10 15 minutes you can go out and get it and have it yourself. So there's no reason why you should have this scarcity of being like, I have to eat it today because I can't have it tomorrow. Well, in reality, that's not really the case. You can have it whenever you want. It's just more of, like you said, shifting that perspective, shifting that mindset of being, hey, I can have this whenever I want, as long as I know, exactly how it's going to affect me and what it is going to do to my body and, the goals that I'm trying to work on. Does that make sense? I know I've kind of
you're hitting it there, because that's the thing is people don't consciously say like, oh, I'm, this food is scarce and I'm going to have this scarcity mindset around this food. What they are consciously doing is creating this restrictive food environment to where they go in these cycles of like cutting things out or restricting things or not eating very much of things, to where then when they do give themselves permission to indulge on something, they feel this need to eat as much of it as they possibly can and to eat past that point of fullness. Sometimes even a lot of times consciously even thinking, well, I want to almost make myself feel sick from this food. Like I want to eat so much of it that I don't want it, that I'm not going to want it again later. Yeah. And now at that point, we are definitely heading more down the line of truly binge eating, which again, that's really more of a separate topic here. But in general, like if this is you and you are just finding yourself overeating things because you potentially have this scarcity mindset around food because maybe you restrict them, and so some of these foods are triggering for you when you do eat them, then what you need to do from here is really first identify which of these foods or which categories of foods create this response in you and cause you to overeat, cause you to eat past the point of fullness. Like really identify what they are, and then from there, this is gonna sound potentially surprising to people, but add those foods in to your normal diet on a daily basis. And I'm telling you, that right there is step number one, because we have to combat this feeling of scarcity by truly adding abundance. And yes, there might be instances where you do overeat through that process of adding these foods in. I will say it's definitely helpful if you can work with a coach through this process to help you through these mindset blocks that will likely come up during this process. But that really is step number one, of you have to add these foods back in and truly show yourself that you can have these foods as much as you want and that you can feel safe in that. So that then when you do go to have the pizza, you can be eating that slice and you can be checking in with yourself and asking yourself, am I satisfied? Like, is this pizza tasting less and less good every single bite? Because maybe that's a sign that I need to put it away and remind myself that I could have the leftovers tomorrow if I want to have them.
Yeah. And just to kind of give everybody a perspective, in my own life, what I try to do is, I love ice cream, right? So we have literally the Halo Top ice cream bars, which if you guys haven't had
Omar's
them,
addicted to
I am addicted. Please have them because they're delicious. But anyways, I really tried to incorporate one pop per day, because at the end of the day,
about to say per meal. I was like, oh wow.
One pop per meal. That would be a little much. It would honestly probably make me feel sick. But what my point is, having those almost every day or every other day, or 3-4 times a week helps me so that when I come across, like, for example, Thanksgiving or Christmas, and there is, I don't know, ice cream or whatever that might look like, I don't necessarily have to have that scarcity mindset and be like, oh my God, I can't have this every other day, so I'm going to have a ton of it today. Because if I have it almost, 3-4 times a week or every other day or whatever, then I'm like, you know what? I don't have to have it on Monday. I can have it Tuesday. I can have it Wednesday. So if I really want it, I'll have the one piece and hopefully stop there, as opposed to me being like, I need to eat it now because I won't have it any other day, right? I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
No, that's a great tip there, and great advice of how you actually incorporate that into your real life. So number 2 now, if maybe number 1 didn't resonate with you, maybe you're like, no, I have a very balanced diet here. Well, number 2, and this one I see come up a lot with women, especially those who are typically more prone to anxiety, more prone to stressful lives, just different emotions like that. So typically what comes up here is if you are overly dependent on food as a coping mechanism for emotions like stress, sadness, or really any kind of emotions that are outside your normal, your neutral state. Now, this is definitely you, and I think a lot of people can already self-identify here, but this is definitely you if you find yourself overeating every time you do get stressed. Maybe you had a busy work week and you're like, oh, it was a crazy week. I was really run down today, and now you're already thinking about like, well, on my way home from work, I'm going to go stop at, my favorite fast food restaurant. And I'm going to order everything on the menu. And like you have that pattern in place. That is absolutely definitely you. Some people, it's not even that blatant. It might just be that like they had a really long day. They're really tired. And at the end of the night, they're like,
I need to have that glass of wine.
Yep, I need my glass of wine to unwind. And now they're hands in the bag of chips. And now they're just like eating past the point of fullness again. So if this is you, honestly, I could do a whole episode on just different ways to work through this and just really steps to take here. But number 1, right off the bat, it's really important that you are addressing the emotions themselves rather than focusing on how do I stop the patterns of eating past fullness. Let's really back up and really talk about how we are navigating our emotions as a whole. And again, this is really where having a coach work through this stuff with you is really important, because when we are starting to talk more about our mindset and about our emotions, it is harder to work through these things on your own, but it's not impossible at all. So really what I would do there, number 1, is name it to tame it. So a classic statement, works really well with toddlers.
I like that statement.
Works really, really well with adults too. So in general, if you want to really neutralize the emotion you're feeling, you need to actually name what the true emotion is. A lot of people mess up here in that they are very limited in their vocabulary of their emotions. And they might be like, oh, I am feeling just sad, or I am just feeling stressed. And they just have like these like 3 emotions they go between, like anxious, sad, stressed. But the reality is there's a ton of emotions out there. So what I do personally is anytime I want to really name the emotion I'm feeling, if I want to practice this name it to tame it philosophy, I will always pull up the emotions wheel. If you've never heard of the emotions wheel, just Google it. It's super simple. It's
I'm
everywhere.
laughing because it's such a good way to just help identify, or really like help you describe what you're feeling. And to me, I think it's awesome. Yeah.
So essentially, you're going to want to pull out the emotions wheel, Google it. It's super simple. Identify what is the true emotion that you're feeling, and then identify what is the emotion that you want to feel here. And rather than turning to food as our immediate first response coping mechanism, really look at what are some other ways I could cope with this emotion and other ways I could help myself move towards the emotion that I actually want to feel. So maybe if I identify that I'm actually feeling disappointed. I thought I was feeling sad, but I'm just feeling disappointed. And when I realize it's what I really want to feel is proud of myself. And, after doing that reflection, that right there is probably going to help shift your state. It's going to help shift your thoughts and really shift your responses, because now you're going to know, okay, I know that what I really want to feel is proud of myself. And I know that if I go and just down that pint of ice cream, I'm not going to feel proud of myself. I'm going to feel more disappointed. And so logically now you can kind of shift out of that, just I call it like the lizard brain of like your reactive, responsive, just like primitive brain that's very reactive and very responsive to emotions. And you can actually really use logic here to think through of like, as much as I want to just drown my emotions in that pint of ice cream, I know that it's only going to make me feel worse. So instead, I'm going to, call up a friend and just talk through what I'm feeling. And then, you know what? If after that conversation, I still want the ice cream, I'll give myself permission to have it. But maybe then I will actually, instead of just eating straight out of the pint, I'll scoop out a serving, put it in a bowl, and eat it a little bit more mindfully so that I'm not eating past that point of fullness.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong too, Vanessa, but I'm in my brain, I'm like, I can very clearly see the pattern of how this thing could play out. And if you are overly dependent on, food as a coping mechanism, you're going to, eat to the point where you don't feel comfortable. And then what happens the next morning is you wake up and you probably don't feel your best. So at that point, you're like, you know what? Today, I'm going to do a cleanse, or I'm going to restrict myself and not eat as much because I had so much last night. And so then what ends up happening is, we go down this rabbit hole of, almost overeating, undereating. And that's where your body is just like, what in the hell is going on? Like, what are we doing here? Right. And that's what makes things so much harder. And it makes that much harder for people to really see any progress or, have a sustainable approach to all this,
Yeah, exactly. Well, then moving right on here. So number 3 in reasons why you keep eating past fullness is continuously eating while distracted.
I think this is probably the one that I resonate with.
Yeah, this is the one that I am the most guilty of here. And really, this is you. If you find yourself where, like, honestly, if you assess the way you eat, are you consistently eating while working?
Yes.
Or while scrolling on your phone?
Yes.
Or while watching TV?
Yes. If you said yes, then you're one of me.
I will say, though, babe, I have to give you some credit. You're not like that with every single meal. Typically at breakfast, we'll eat it together. Maybe sometimes we might put on like a podcast or something in the background. But typically, like, we have like that kind of one meal where we'll actually talk and just really sit and be present with our meal. Or if we go out to dinner, we're definitely more present. But regardless, this is definitely you. And this is one that, this is me especially when it comes to weekends or evenings, if we want to relax and we just sit in front of the TV, that's typically for me when I find myself eating past fullness.
Yeah.
And so when I find myself caught up in that routine of eating past fullness because I'm eating with distraction, really what I do is take a step back and really practice incorporating more mindful meals in. And what that means is really take a step back and see if you can actually challenge yourself just one meal out of the day. If you're currently eating every meal distracted, like it's even, you're not necessarily watching TV at every meal, but maybe you're scrolling your phone while you eat, you're on your computer while you eat. If that's you, if you find yourself in that position, really work on just one meal per day, eating completely distraction free. And it's going to feel extremely uncomfortable if you're not used to that. But I cannot explain to you how important this is in you developing that ability to understand your true level of satiety. Because if we are distracted, your brain physically cannot understand like all the different signals. If you are also, scrolling your phone and your brain's interpreting all the things you're seeing on your phone, and you're also talking to somebody and you're doing these different things, then that food in your mouth, you're not tasting it as much as you would, which is going to cause you to keep putting more into your mouth. Because again, you're not tasting as much. So you're just going to end up mechanically putting more and more into your mouth. And then you're going to find yourself get to the end and be like, I didn't even remember eating that meal, for one. And number 2, suddenly now I finished the meal and I'm stuffed, and I realized that I probably should have stopped several bites ago because I'm really actually overly full now.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest one for me is when I'm usually, because what I usually do is it's usually dinner where I'm watching TV or I'm talking to you or I'm scrolling on my phone or whatever I'm doing. So it just prevents me from paying attention to what I'm eating and really listening and tuning into like my hunger cues, if that makes any sense. So what ends up happening, and this is really bad, is I'll watch TV while I'm eating, and next thing you know, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm like choking because I'm like, I haven't had any water, and it's so bad. But then obviously, of course, like after I drink water, I'm like, oh, like, I'm like, I feel good now. And then I'm like, oh, I'm actually really full. Like I don't need to have all of this. So yes, that's one that I need to start working on, and just being more mindful, because if anything, it just distracts me from really listening to my body and be like, you know what? Maybe I don't need to have, that other piece of chicken or this much more rice. I'm just full already, and I'm satiated and I'm comfortable now.
Yeah. Well, so then by practicing this mindful eating, by adding this into one meal a day, what this is going to do for you. So, like if you're like Omar and you take massive bites of food and you find yourself essentially choking, because that is Omar.
That's bad.
then this is going to challenge you to now be more aware. So now you're going to be able to pay attention to like, okay, I could take smaller bites of food. I'm going to chew this for longer before I swallow it. And you're just going to bring more awareness to that and be able to break some of those habitual behaviors of just like taking massive bites, chewing it a few times and swallowing it and choking. Now,
and literally choking.
Now, for anybody else, though, like not everybody necessarily takes massive bites of food like Omar.
Yeah.
But for everybody, and like this is for myself, what I typically will do here when I'm like, all right, I need to take a step back and really eat some more mindful meals is to give myself something to do and think about as I'm really incorporating this mindful eating process. Is I will check in with myself throughout the meal and keep asking myself 2 questions. 1, what does this meal taste like? So every bite I'm taking, I'm really describing in my head. And if I really want to go next levels, I'll bring a journal and I'll actually journal about it. But I'll be constantly asking myself, what does this taste like? And you're going to notice that the taste changes over time. The more you eat, the closer you get to that level of satiety, the less flavorful the food is going to be, unless it is a really hyper palatable food, and that's really a different story. But even then, at that point, you find that, as you're continuously eating the pizza over and over and over again, that first bite compared to the, 30th bite tastes very, very different. And it's just because you almost kind of neutralize your taste buds to it as you're eating more and more and more. So keep checking in with yourself, just like, how does this food taste? And like really using that to bring awareness and to keep bringing your focus back to the food itself and not get distracted. And then the other thing is keep rating how hungry or full you are. So if you look up the hunger to fullness scale, a scale of 1 to 10, I know we've posted it on Instagram before as well, but essentially you want to stay kind of right in the middle. So you don't want to ever go too far to the, one end towards 1. You don't want to go too far to the other end towards 10. You never want to be starving. You never want to be stuffed. You want to kind of end up between that like 4 to 6 range. So if at the beginning of the meal you rate yourself and you're like, oh my God, I'm starving right now, like I am a 1 on this scale, then every couple of minutes or every few bites, check back in with yourself and say, okay, where am I now on the scale? Oh, now I'm a 3. Okay, so we're getting there. Now you're like, okay, now I'm actually a 4. Ooh, now I'm a 5. It's like, all right, now I'm a 6. And at this point, I'm feeling, as I'm getting more familiar with this, I recognize that I actually feel the best if I stop eating around that 6. So even though part of me is saying, let me keep eating this, I'm actually going to put it away. And maybe I'll come back to it in 10 minutes if I misjudged myself and I realize that I'm actually, 5 and I actually want to eat a little bit more.
That's a good one. I think I'm going to start using that one. Or if anything, just to help me be more in tune with myself, to be like, okay, whether it's a scale or just like noticing the flavor of the food or the changes in it, I'm just like, at the end of the day, as long as you're paying more attention to what you're doing and what you're eating and how you're feeling as things kind of, happen, that's better than you just being like numbelessly like eating as you're watching TV or on your phone or whatever. Is that a word? No. Numbelessly?
You just made that up.
It is now.
Now moving right
mindlessly,
on.
That's what I had.
Mindlessly. Yeah. Numbly, mindlessly. You just kind of combine the two. It works. Now, number 4 on our list of reasons why you keep eating past fullness is you're not eating enough earlier in the day. And now, Omar even kind of alluded to this one earlier when he was talking about it. A lot of times he will end up in that cycle of overeating and then undereating. And this, honestly, like there might be multiple reasons on this list that you are eating past the point of fullness. Like it's likely that there are multiple reasons. But number 4 often does happen as a result of overeating itself.
Yeah.
I find people get caught up in the overeating, undereating cycle, and then they end up skipping breakfast or skipping lunch because they're just not really hungry or they're really busy, or they just, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, they're thinking, well, if I eat less, that should mean that I'm going to lose weight faster because, eating less equals weight loss, blah, blah, blah. And so then they just restrict food. But guess what happens is these people are also typically the ones that find themselves overeating at nighttime. They are eating their dinner and now they're just like stuffed and they're going to bed really stuffed and they're eating past the point of fullness and it doesn't feel good. So if this is you, really step number 1, a lot of times I find it's breakfast that is the meal that's getting skipped the most often. So let's really start there. Let's look at what are you currently eating for breakfast. If it's absolutely nothing, we're not going to go from absolutely nothing to like a nice, huge, big balanced meal. Let's start with just something. But regardless of what that something is, we want it to be balanced. And what I mean by balance is we want to have a protein source, a carb source, and a fat source, and ideally a fiber source as well. So what that means is maybe currently you're eating nothing, but now instead of just having your coffee for breakfast, you're actually going to make a coffee shake. And within that, you might do your coffee with some protein powder and some banana for both your fiber and your carbs, and some creamer or some nut butter or some coconut oil or something. And that actually, I just made that up honestly on the spot. That sounds pretty good, actually. But I've had similar smoothies like that, and that is actually a really good combo. So I'm going to recommend that.
Steal it from Vanessa. And I think on this one, Vanessa, I've been guilty of this lately because work has been super busy and we just have a lot going on. And what ends up happening for me is, I track macros because I like to have a little bit more data on what it is that I'm eating and like my intake and stuff like that. So unfortunately, what ends up happening is I have a big breakfast, a decent lunch, and then at night I have like 1,000 calories left. So then I end up overeating at night just to hit my macros, but then I go to bed uncomfortable, or like sometimes I got heartburn a couple nights ago and I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. So, and as I was chatting with Kat, my coach, I was kind of telling her about this, and she's like, well, why don't we try a couple of things? One of them being eating a more balanced lunch, breakfast, and dinner. So meaning instead of, leaving 1,000 calories for the night, how about we spread those calories throughout the day? Maybe stick a balanced snack in between. And then that way, when it comes to, 6, 7 o'clock at night, whenever I want to eat dinner, I don't have that much food to eat at night just to be able to, say I hit my macros today. Or the other thing that I've been doing lately too that has helped tremendously is pre-tracking my meals, meaning I already know what I'm going to have for breakfast. I already know what I'm going to have for lunch. I already know what I'm going to have for dinner and my snack. Therefore, it's just a matter of me, making a couple minutes or, stepping out of my office for a few minutes and being able to eat that. But that barrier of entry, because I already know what I'm going to eat, is so much smaller, so much lower, so that it just makes things easier and more convenient, if that makes any sense,
Exactly. And what you really just kind of described there is actually a very common thing that happens during the reverse diet process, which is what you're currently doing. You're going through that reverse diet with your coach of going through the process of increasing your calories over time.
Yeah. And so for a little bit of context, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah, I did a cut this past summer. And now after our wedding, I wanted to fit in my suit. So I was telling Kat, okay, after the wedding, then let's start increasing my calories, because I want to have, I have some other aesthetic goals that I'm working towards. So yeah, I want to be able to eat a little bit more there.
Yep, exactly. So when people are often going through that process of reverse dieting and adding more calories over time, typically they'll just say, okay, I'm just going to continue to eat what I'm normally eating, but now their calories are getting higher, and they're like, okay, my breakfast is still the same, my lunch is still the same, and they just find themselves at the end of the day, because they didn't plan out in advance, and they're like, oh crap, I still have, however many more calories here, so I'm just going to fill them all in here at my dinner and my bedtime snack.
Yep.
And so that's where, if you're somebody who does track your macros or track your calories, and you're going through that process of reverse dieting where your calories are increasing, you need to constantly go back and audit your total normal daily routines with food and really look at every single meal where you can increase. And if you're already like, well, my breakfast already leaves me really full and satisfied, then that's fine. We can increase calories in a way that doesn't add food volume. So like we were just talking about this with you, and I suggested like, okay, so yes, you like to have your oatmeal and your eggs in the morning, and you might be like, well, that meal really leaves me full, so I don't really know where I could add food to that. You don't have to necessarily add food volume, but you could, instead of putting stevia in your oats to sweeten it, you could add raw honey.
Yeah.
That right there, you take a 0-calorie sweetener and you replace it with a nutritious, calorie-dense sweetener like honey, and you're giving yourself great source of more calories, more carbohydrates in a nutritious way that is not going to be any more filling in your stomach.
Yeah, it's just different because now you have more calories to work with, and so you have to learn how to incorporate this into your daily life. And like you said, a lot of times what I've found is liquid calories, meaning like having a drink like a Gatorade during my workout.
Pour yourself a whiskey mid-workout.
Exactly. It adds those calories to it so that at the end of the day, I don't feel like I'm stuffing myself at any given point.
Yeah, exactly.